Officer Rodriguez had seen a lot during her 12 years on the force, but the scene unfolding before her on Maple Lane was something special. A petite woman with a precision-cut bob, standing in the middle of the street, her face contorted with righteous fury, pointing accusingly at a man calmly dismantling an above-ground swimming pool in his own backyard. "He's destroying neighborhood property," Karen Wilkins screeched, her voice carrying across the manicured lawns of Sunnyside Estates. "I want him arrested immediately." Officer Rodriguez glanced at her partner, who was desperately trying to maintain a professional expression. The man in question, James Chen, stood ankle-deep in empty pool water, wrench in hand, looking bewildered as Karen continued her tirade. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez began, "you reported vandalism, but Mr. Chen here says this is his pool on his property." "It doesn't matter whose name is on the deed," Karen declared, clutching her Homeowners Association rulebook like a sacred text. "All external modifications must be approved by the committee." That pool was not approved for removal. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I installed it temporarily for my kids' summer break. The HOA approved it with the condition that it be removed by September 15th. Today is September 14th. Karen stepped forward, her designer sandals clicking on the pavement. "The approval was for a blue pool. That pool is clearly teal. The removal request must be filed separately." This was Karen Wilkins' fourth call to authorities in as many weeks. As the newly elected president of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association, she had taken to her position with a fervor that bordered on religious zealotry. What had begun as a woman concerned with maintaining property values had evolved into something more complex, a crusade for control that consumed her every waking moment. Officer Rodriguez eyed the color of the pool. It did indeed appear to be teal rather than blue, but such a distinction seemed trivial at best, especially given that the item in question was already half dismantled. "Ma'am, this is not a police matter. This is between Mr. Chen and your HOA." Karen's face flushed crimson. "You don't understand. Everything in Sunnyside Estates is my responsibility. The integrity of our community depends on strict adherence to the rules." What the officers didn't know was that Karen's obsession with order had begun 6 months earlier, after her husband of 15 years had left her for his 25-year-old personal assistant. The divorce had been messy, public, and had left Karen with nothing but the house and a shattered sense of control. The HOO presidency had become her lifeline, the one arena where she could exert absolute authority. "I'll be filing a formal complaint about your negligence," Karen informed the officers, fishing her phone from her designer purse. "I have the chief's personal number." She didn't, of course, but intimidation had become Karen's default strategy. As she dialed, her hands trembled slightly. She couldn't lose this battle, not when she'd already lost so much. Behind her, the neighbors had begun to gather, watching the spectacle with a mixture of amusement and second-hand embarrassment. Karen pretended not to notice, but their presence made her heart race. She couldn't back down now. Not with an audience. What Karen couldn't admit, even to herself, was that this wasn't about a pool at all. It was about proving that she still mattered. Karen spent the following morning compiling a dossier on James Chen's HOA violations. 3 inches of grass exceeding regulation height in April. A mailbox painted midnight blue instead of the approved navy blue. Christmas lights left hanging until January 3rd. A full 2 days past the mandated removal date. "This will show them," she muttered, stapling the documents with excessive force. The Chen file had become the thickest in her collection, housed in a pristine filing cabinet in the spare bedroom she'd converted into her HOA command center. The walls were lined with neighborhood maps, color-coded to indicate compliance status. Red pins marked repeat offenders. The Chen residence had 5. Karen's phone buzzed. A text from her daughter, Megan. "Mom, we're still on for lunch tomorrow, right?" Karen frowned. She'd forgotten about their monthly lunch date. Her relationship with her 20-year-old daughter had become strained since the divorce. Megan, always closer to her father, had made it clear she found Karen's HOA fixation concerning. "Can't make it. Emergency HOA meeting unauthorized pool removal." She hit send without hesitation, ignoring the pang of guilt. Megan would understand someday. Order was worth sacrificing for. The emergency meeting, convened in Karen's immaculate living room, consisted of the 3 remaining board members who hadn't resigned since her takeover. Martha Jenkins, a retired school teacher, examined the Chen file with visible discomfort. "Karen, dear, I'm not sure this constitutes an emergency," Martha ventured. "The pool was temporary, and it is September." "It's the principle," Karen insisted, pacing energetically. "If we allow one violation, soon the entire neighborhood will descend into chaos. Property values will plummet. Is that what you want, Martha? To lose your retirement investment?" Martha exchanged glances with the other board members, who stared fixedly at their coffee cups. "We should put it to a vote," suggested Henry Wallace, a mild-mannered accountant who'd agreed to join the board only because no one else would. Karen's smile tightened. "As president, I have executive authority during compliance emergencies." Section 7, Paragraph 3. No one challenged her interpretation of the bylaws. They rarely did anymore. After the meeting, Karen drove slowly through the neighborhood, noting violations in her leather-bound notebook: a basketball hoop visible from the street, unauthorized wind chimes, a garden gnome that exceeded height restrictions by at least 2 inches. She paused outside the Chen residence. James was in the driveway with his 2 children, teaching them to wash the family car. They were laughing, splashing each other with soapy water. The dismantled pool lay in pieces by the garbage bins. For a fleeting moment, Karen felt something unexpected, a hollow ache in her chest. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? Before the divorce, certainly. Maybe even years before. She shook the feeling away. This wasn't about happiness. This was about standards. That evening, Karen drafted a formal violation notice, complete with a $500 fine for improper disposal of recreational equipment visible from street level. She hand-delivered it after dark, slipping it into the Chen's mailbox with grim satisfaction. What she didn't anticipate was James Chen's response: not compliance, but a neighborhood-wide email questioning the legitimacy of Karen's interpretation of HOA regulations. By morning, her inbox was flooded with messages from residents expressing similar frustrations. Karen's hands shook as she deleted them, one by one. This wasn't just insubordination. It was mutiny. "That's quite a list," he said, but without malice. Karen knelt to eye level with Lily, who partially hid behind her father's leg. "I brought something for you," she said, presenting a small gift bag. Inside was a miniature garden gnome, deliberately taller than regulation height. "For your garden," Karen explained. "I thought perhaps you might like to break a rule or 2. Lily accepted the gnome with solemn gravity, examining its cheerful red hat and unruly white beard. "He's not regulation," she said, clearly familiar with the term. "No," Karen agreed. "He's much better than regulation." Later, as dusk settled over the gathering and fairy lights twinkled in Karen's formerly regulation-perfect trees, she found herself beside the inflatable pool, where several children splashed happily. Megan had arrived and was deep in conversation with Mrs. Abernathy about bird migration patterns. James approached, offering a paper plate with a slice of cake. "Quite a turnaround," he observed, nodding toward the children. "What changed?" Karen watched the children play, their laughter rising into the evening air. "I realized I was enforcing rules that had stopped making sense," she said simply. "Even to me. It wasn't the whole truth, of course. The full reckoning had been more painful, confronting how she'd used the HOA to fill the emptiness left by her divorce. How controlling her surroundings had been easier than controlling her grief. But that was a conversation for another day, perhaps with Dr. Levinson, or eventually with Megan. For now, watching her neighbors enjoy themselves in her yard, without fear of citation, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the tentative, fragile beginnings of peace. The neighborhood would still need rules, reasonable ones, democratically decided. Property values would still matter, but perhaps there was room for both regulation and joy, for both standards and forgiveness. As the party wound down and neighbors drifted homeward, many stopped to thank Karen, their thanks tinged with lingering confusion about her transformation. She accepted their gratitude awkwardly, still learning how to navigate this new territory of community over control. Only James lingered until the end, helping stack chairs as the last guests departed. "The neighborhood committee meets Thursdays," he said casually. "We could use someone who knows the existing bylaws inside and out. Someone with organizational skills." Karen looked up, surprised. "You'd want me involved? After everything?" James shrugged. "Everyone deserves a second chance, even HOA presidents." He left her there in her transformed backyard, surrounded by the evidence of connection: scattered napkins, cake crumbs, the sound of distant conversation as neighbors walked home together. Karen's phone vibrated with a text from Megan: "Proud of you, Mom." 3 simple words that meant everything. In her garden, slightly off-center and gloriously non-regulation, Lily's gnome smiled up at the stars. Karen made no move to straighten it. The letter arrived in every Sunnyside Estates mailbox on a crisp Saturday morning. The envelope was cream-colored, the paper inside heavyweight and official-looking. At the top, the familiar HOA letterhead, but the content was anything but typical. Effective immediately, the letter began: "I am stepping down as president of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association." Neighbors emerged from their houses almost simultaneously, letters in hand, exchanging bewildered glances across manicured lawns. Karen Wilkins, voluntarily relinquishing power? It seemed impossible. The letter continued: "Recent events have prompted me to reconsider the purpose and implementation of our community regulations. I propose a 3-month moratorium on all non-safety-related citations, while a democratically elected committee reviews our bylaws for reasonableness and necessity." Most shocking of all was the final paragraph: "As a gesture of good faith, I invite all residents to an informal gathering in my backyard next Saturday. Dress code, strictly unenforced. Lawn ornaments, enthusiastically welcomed." James Chen read the letter twice, convinced it must be a trap. His neighbor Ted speculated it was a nervous breakdown. Martha Jenkins, who had served on the HOA board, simply smiled and said, "Well, it's about time." Karen spent the week before the gathering in uncharacteristic activity. She hired landscapers to remove the precision-cut hedges that had isolated her property from the neighbors. She purchased picnic tables, string lights, and most surprising of all, a small inflatable pool, which she installed herself despite the imperfect results. When Saturday arrived, she expected no one to come. Why would they? Her reputation had been built on rigidity and retribution, not community and connection. But at 4 o'clock, Martha Jenkins appeared with a potato salad. By 4:30, a dozen neighbors milled about Karen's backyard. By 5, the gathering had swelled to include most of Sunnyside Estates. Karen moved through the crowd awkwardly, decades of social skills rusty from disuse. She overheard whispers, caught curious glances, but pressed on with determined hospitality. When James Chen arrived with his family, a hush fell over the nearest cluster of neighbors. Karen approached them directly, pulse racing. "Mr. Chen," she said formally, then corrected herself. "James, thank you for coming." He nodded cautiously. "Surprising invitation." "Yes, well," Karen cleared her throat. "I wanted to apologize about the pool, and the police, and the fines." James studied her face, searching for insincerity. Finding none, his expression softened slightly. The Chen rebellion, as Karen had taken to calling it in her increasingly frequent calls to her therapist, gained momentum with alarming speed. What had begun as a dispute over a pool had evolved into a full-scale neighborhood uprising against what residents now refer to as the Wilkins regime. James Chen, a mild-mannered software engineer who had previously shown zero interest in HOA politics, emerged as an unlikely revolutionary leader. His diplomatic approach and reasonable tone only infuriated Karen further. She preferred open enemies to those who disguised their defiance behind politeness. "They've organized a meeting without me," Karen informed Dr. Levinson during her Tuesday session, clutching a tissue. "At the community center. They're calling it a neighborhood dialogue on HOA practices." Dr. Levinson adjusted her glasses. "And how does that make you feel, Karen?" "Betrayed," Karen said instantly. After everything I've done for property values. What Karen didn't articulate, even to her therapist, was the crushing fear beneath her anger. The HOO presidency had become her identity after the divorce. Without it, who was she? The community center was packed that Thursday evening. Karen arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a power suit and heels, her presentation materials meticulously organized in a leather portfolio. She chose a seat in the front row, back straight, expression neutral despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. James Chen opened the meeting with a conciliatory tone that grated on Karen's nerves. This isn't about targeting any individual, he assured the crowd, though his glance toward Karen suggested otherwise. It's about creating an HOA that serves the community rather than controls it. Applause followed. Karen's knuckles whitened around her portfolio. When her turn came to speak, Karen approached the podium with practiced confidence. She had rehearsed her speech for hours, a masterclass in defending strict regulation as the foundation of community value. Before I became president, she began, voice steady, this neighborhood was descending into mediocrity. Unapproved paint colors, non-regulation mailboxes, swing sets visible from the street. The crowd remained silent, faces unreadable. Some of you may find the rules excessive, she continued. But these standards are what separate Sunnyside estates from ordinary neighborhoods. They're why your homes have appreciated 15% in 3 years. Someone coughed. A baby fussed in the back row. I've dedicated countless unpaid hours to protecting your investments, Karen pressed on, her voice rising slightly. And this is the thanks I receive. A coup orchestrated by a man who can't distinguish between blue and teal. The room shifted uncomfortably. Karen realized she'd veered off script, but couldn't seem to correct course. Mr. Chen broke the rules, she insisted. If we allow exceptions for one resident, where does it end? Lawn flamingos? Winged socks? AstroTurf? From the back of the room, an elderly voice called out. Would that really be so terrible, Karen? It was Mrs. Abernathy, the neighborhood's oldest resident. Karen had recently cited her for excessive bird feeding. The question hung in the air, deceptively simple yet devastating in its implications. Would it really be so terrible? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in recent memory, she found herself without a ready answer. The meeting ended with a vote to review all HOA bylaws. Karen abstained, gathering her materials with trembling hands. Outside, rain had begun to fall, matching her darkening mood. In her car, alone at last, she allowed herself exactly 1 minute of tears before straightening her spine. This wasn't over. The Chens and their sympathizers might have won this battle, but Karen Wilkins didn't surrender easily. She would simply need a new strategy. Karen awoke at 3:17 a.m. with a gasp, drenched in sweat, despite the autumn chill. The nightmare had been vivid. She stood alone in the center of Sunnyside Estates, houses crumbling around her, property values plummeting in real time on a giant scoreboard while residents pointed and laughed. Sleep-deprived and jittery from too much coffee, Karen spent the morning in her home office, researching HOA case law. There had to be precedent she could use against the Chen faction, something definitive that would restore her authority. The doorbell interrupted her third hour of research. Peering through the peephole, Karen was surprised to see her daughter Megan standing on the porch, arms crossed over her university sweatshirt. I brought lunch, Megan announced when Karen opened the door, holding up a paper bag. Since you missed our date. Karen's immediate impulse was to explain that she was too busy for impromptu visits, but something in her daughter's determined expression stopped her. When had Megan's jawline sharpened to match her father's? When had those faint worry lines appeared around her eyes? 20 minutes, Karen conceded, leading the way to her kitchen, where blueprints of neighborhood surveillance camera placement covered the table. Megan cleared a space without comment, unpacking sandwiches and 2 containers of soup. They ate in awkward silence until Megan finally spoke. Mom, I'm worried about you. Karen stiffened. I'm fine. Busy, but fine. You're not fine. Megan insisted gently. Dad's concerned too. He says, your father has no right to be concerned about anything I do. Karen interrupted, her voice sharp. Not anymore. Megan's expression hardened. This isn't about Dad. It's about you becoming the neighborhood villain. Villain? Karen's sandwich froze halfway to her mouth. I'm protecting people's investments. You're terrorizing people over the color of their mailboxes, Megan countered. Mr. Chen's daughter, Lily, is in my childhood development class. She says the other kids call her pool girl now because of the police incident. She's 7, Mom. The sandwich in Karen's hand suddenly seemed unappetizing. She set it down, a strange hollowness expanding in her chest. I'm doing what's necessary, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Megan reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. Why is this so important to you? Really? The question was simple, but it pierced Karen's carefully constructed defenses. Why was this so important? The rehearsed answers about property values and community standards suddenly seemed insufficient, even to her own ears. Everything else changed, Karen whispered, surprising herself with the admission. The house, my marriage, your father's life. But the rules, they stayed the same. I could count on them. Megan squeezed her hand. Mom, rules don't love you back. The words hit with unexpected force. Karen pulled her hand away, rising abruptly to clear the dishes. She needed movement, distance from this conversation that was veering dangerously close to truths she wasn't ready to face. Later that afternoon, driving to the monthly HOA finance meeting, Karen took a wrong turn and found herself passing the community playground. She slowed, watching children chase each other across the equipment. Among them was a little girl she recognized as Lily Chen, sitting alone on a swing, scuffing her shoes in the dirt while other children played together. Karen parked, intending to document the condition of the playground equipment for her records. Instead, she found herself sitting on a bench, watching Lily's isolation with growing discomfort. Was this connected to the pool incident, to becoming pool girl? The thought created a strange tightness in Karen's throat. When the finance meeting began 30 minutes later, Karen's seat remained empty, the first HOA obligation she had missed in 3 years. She was still at the playground, watching shadows lengthen across the grass, confronting questions about herself that had no simple regulatory answers.